From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
President Biden welcomes President-elect Trump to the Oval Office for a private meeting, with some reports saying that Biden intended to make the case to his successor for continued aid to Ukraine. Meantime, President Trump announces one of his biggest cabinet picks yet, saying his choice for defense secretary is Fox News' Pete Hegseth. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnist Bill McGurn and letters editor and editorial writer Elliot Kaufman. A week and a day after Donald Trump's comeback victory over Kamala Harris, there are no doubt some hard political feelings still in the country and including in the White House, but none on display, at least in front of the public today, which got to see a brief moment of Trump and Biden sitting in puffy chairs in front of a roaring fireplace, shaking hands, pledging a successful transition. Listen to this.
Well, Mr. President-elect and former President Donald, congratulations. Thank you. And looking forward to having like we said, a smooth transition. Do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated, what you need. And we're going to get a chance to talk about some of that today. So welcome back.
And, thank you very much. And politics is tough. And it's, in many cases, not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
After shooing out the reporters, President Trump and President Biden reportedly met for something like a couple hours. Kamala Harris was not in that meeting. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that by the length of the meeting, it tells you they had an in-depth conversation on an array of issues, unquote. One of those, according to some of the reporting going into today, was that Biden was going to try to make the case for Ukraine. Meantime, his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said that the Biden administration will send every authorized dollar of aid to Ukraine between now and January 20. Listen to this.
The president is determined that we push every dollar out the door that we have at our disposal, notably from the $61 billion supplemental that was passed on a bipartisan basis by Congress some months ago. And we're on track to do exactly that. So the drawdowns that we can do from our military equipment, they will go forward. Obligating funds, that will go forward. And that should ensure that Ukraine continues to receive from us what it needs.
Bill, what's your sense of how President Trump should be thinking about the Ukraine question? He promised during the campaign repeatedly that he would lead some kind of negotiation, that he would solve the conflict before he even takes office on January 20. What does that suggest to you about where his head is at on the question of Ukraine versus Russia and this war that is still going on?
I mean, look, Donald Trump has made it very clear. He believes that peace in Ukraine, lasting peace, can be got with the deal that only he can make, or that he can make, primarily with Vladimir Putin. I think if I had one piece of advice for the president about this is don't make a deal without the Ukrainian buy-in, because the history of those deals is horrible, whatever the security guarantees. Remember, the Ukrainians initially felt that a security guarantee from the West when they gave up nukes a long time ago. And more relevant is that the peace deal we reached with North Vietnam, we cut out the South Vietnamese leader, President Tu, and of course we gave them a security guarantee. Then when the North Vietnamese rolled into Saigon, we didn't help. So I think the big thing is don't rule out the small countries whose existence is what you're negotiating. And I think that goes for Taiwan too. But I think a deal just between the U.S. and Russia would really be disgusting. You have to get the Ukrainians. It's their country. They're not the aggressor. If you don't get their sign in, I think it's by definition a bad deal.
What I'd add to that, Elliot, is my advice, I guess, would be to negotiate from a position of strength. President Trump should know that the United States has the strongest military. It has a big stick in any kind of negotiations. It has been sending Ukraine kind of munitions and missiles and air defense systems that have kept its defenders going there. And one thing that is also important to keep in mind, too, is the way that these adversaries are connected now. I mean, reports of tens of thousands of North Korean troops in Russia moving to make an attack on Ukraine, reports of Russia using Iranian systems, drones, for example. So part of what is interesting there, Elliot, is that if Trump comes in and takes a hard policy on Iran, which I guess I expect him to, going back to the maximum pressure campaign was the term from his first stint in office. I mean, that could be a way also of exerting pressure indirectly on Russia and its effort to keep its advance and its war going.
I expect that as well, although I don't think that the indirect pressure in that way would be decisive. I mean, Trump has made clear that negotiations is his plan A. But as you say, if you want to go into negotiations with a strong hand, you need to make it clear that you also have a plan B if the adversary says no, refuses to talk, engage, or make any sort of fair deal. And there, I might look to an article written earlier this month by Representative Mike Waltz, Trump's pick for national security advisor, writing with Matthew Kroenig, who has written for us on occasion. He said, negotiations, yes, that is, of course, the Trump line. However, Putin may need to be pressured into those, and he may need pressure so that he negotiates once he shows up and doesn't just expect Ukrainian and American concessions. And what Waltz wrote is that you could have real economic pressure on Russia, cracking down on oil and gas in a way the Biden administration hasn't, even as it talks tough on this issue. And then furthermore, you could tell Putin, if you don't negotiate at all or meaningfully in good faith, we could send Ukraine more weapons with fewer restrictions. That was Mike Waltz writing, and that view may get a hearing in the White House.
And that's an important point because the party that goes into a negotiation looking like it is desperate for a deal, it's not willing to walk away from the table, is the party that has the weaker hand. And President Trump has sold himself as a master negotiator, going back decades, the art of the deal. And so that suggests, Bill, that maybe he ought to be prepared to walk away. And I know he doesn't want to go to Congress and ask for another aid package for Ukraine, more munitions, more defense systems. Some of his populist MAGA base would definitely not like that. On the other hand, maybe he could make the case to them that, listen, I held this negotiation. I gave Putin a chance, and he wasn't willing to make the kind of deal that Ukraine would accept and that would not be a sellout of Ukraine's defenders. Because the other thing to keep in mind here, Bill, if you're President Trump, is that you're going to be judged and your administration is going to be judged on the basis of the results of this negotiation. It's one thing to say before you take office, we're going to get around a table and we're going to figure this out. We're going to come to some kind of deal. It's another thing to figure out what that deal is supposed to actually look like and sell not only the two parties on that it's a good deal, but sell the public on that it's a good deal.
Yeah, that's right, Kyle. Look, the challenge of Trump's approach to Russia on Ukraine is this. What if Putin doesn't want the deal? And it seems to me there are two big sticking points that are essential to any future there, right? And the sticking point for Russia would be, on the one hand, Ukraine's membership in NATO, which they absolutely abhor. But even Henry Kissinger, who opposed it most of his career, said it's an absolute necessity for any deal. And second, ceding the Ukrainian territory that is taken. They're not going to want to do that. So those are two sticking points. The question is, again, what happens if Putin rejects Trump's deal? Trump has a history of kind of being offended when people don't take what he thinks is a good deal. And I think it wouldn't be hard for him to sell his public. As you said, I tried, I gave him this deal, they didn't want it, and then be tough on him. So I think that could be a scenario. And I think it's likelihood. Look, Donald Trump has to remember, Biden lost Afghanistan, only his fault. totally because of his ego. He wanted to give a speech on September 11th, touting himself as the president that got out of Afghanistan, and the advice of generals be damned. And we did. We left Americans behind. It was so botched. And his approval rating went under, I think, 41 at the time, never recovered from that. I don't think Ukraine is an even more important country than Afghanistan, part of Europe, breadbasket to Russia. I don't think Donald Trump would want to go down as president that lost Ukraine.
And particularly if he understands the value of deterrence. Trump himself has made the case that why did Putin go into Ukraine? Why did it happen under President Biden and not under President Trump? Because President Putin was watching what happened in Afghanistan and came to the conclusion that the U.S. and the West were not going to do anything to deter Putin if the Russian forces marched over the Ukrainian border. Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. So, Elliot, the point that Bill makes here, I think, is good because it suggests that there is a potential here if Trump were to go for some kind of a bad deal that sold out Ukraine, gave Putin the bulk of what he wanted, including some real territorial gains, that could end up being Trump's version of Afghanistan. And you know who is watching now? It would be President Xi over in China, who has his eye on Taiwan. And if he sees some kind of folding here by the U.S. in terms of aid to Ukraine's defenders, he's going to take lessons from that, just as Trump says Putin took lessons from Afghanistan.
I think that's right. Though I think it probably wouldn't be Trump's Kabul, could be his Saigon. And what I mean by that is it won't happen right away like it did for Biden. The U.S. left and it crumbled. Vietnam, you have a peace agreement signed in 73, Saigon falls 75. I think there would be a period of a wait that Russia would need to regroup, rearm. And the question is, how long would it take for Russia to decide that the time is again ripe for another invasion? And I think that's what a bad deal leads to. And the question is, would it be on Trump's watch or would it be on the next guy's watch? We can't know something like that, but a bad deal would have real costs, especially because I don't think anyone argues that Putin has abandoned his objective of swallowing Ukraine or installing a very friendly government in Ukraine. Has that changed? Until we're able to make progress on that or put in place a new status quo, which makes it so much harder for him to pursue that goal, we're just pushing off and perhaps leaving Putin in an even stronger position for the next stage of this goal. And yes, I think Iran would look at that, and I think China would look at that and sort of take the measure of a Trump second term and ask, what could we grab as well?
Let's turn to Donald Trump's latest cabinet announcement on Truth Social on Tuesday night. Here's what he said. I'm honored to announce I have nominated Pete Hegseth to serve in my cabinet as the Secretary of Defense. Pete has spent his entire life as a warrior for the troops and for the country. Trump calling him tough, smart, and a true believer in America first. Hegseth, 44 years old, was an infantry captain, served in Iraq and Afghanistan, has written some books, led some veteran organizations, and lately has been visible on Fox News. Bill, what do you make of this choice?
Yeah, it surprised me. There's no doubt that Pete Hegseth, I think, is behind Donald Trump and his policy. So Donald Trump thinks he would be a loyal, faithful secretary who would carry out his policies. All these things still come down to question marks, I think, on Ukraine. On the Mideast, I think they're all Trump's picks are agreed. Iran's the enemy, Hamas is the enemy, support Israel. And on China, I think they're all hawks. But on Ukraine and Russia, there's a big question mark. I think it awaits seeing what the policy is, what Donald Trump actually does with Russia before we can evaluate these guys. He's taken a lot of criticism in the press. He's not a beltway pick. He doesn't have experience managing this level, but I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt going in. He's not a dummy. I think he has degrees from Harvard and Princeton, and we'll see what he does. I happen to think almost anyone would be a big improvement over what we've had.